Hey everyone. Okay, so you've learned a little about CSS. Maybe you've played around a little. Maybe you've done a little styling. Hopefully you learned a little bit about border radius after the last lesson. You managed to look that up and maybe learn it from the quiz a little if you are doing this on a platform that has the quiz. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little different. Rather than walking you through, some basics and stuff like that, I'm going to basically go through and design this in a way that I think looks kind of nice. And you're going to see me searching up different CSS rules, different properties. Obviously, I'm going to talk you through it as I'm doing it, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining every single property. I want you to start to get used to the idea of looking things up yourself. How do you Google things? How do you find answers? What kind of sites are good to use when you're trying to figure out how to do something when it comes to CSS? And this is going to apply across your web development career. I've been doing this for many years and I still Google very, very basic things that I learned 12 years ago, but because I haven't memorized the rule, it's much easier to Google it. So you're going to see me going through this, making a couple design decisions, probably screwing up a couple times, doing things wrong, eventually winding up with a little calculator that I think looks okay as our starting point for right now. And then in the next video, we'll move into making it interactive, and then we'll go into actually styling it even more. So what are some of the things that I think I want to do with this calculator? Well, I think the buttons are way too bright and crazy, and I don't like that the number buttons don't stand out at all from the operations buttons. I think the font could be a little bit nicer. I don't really love the Times New Roman. I'm pretty sure that's the default. There's also not a lot of spacing between the text input and the various buttons, and they're kind of not we have them in those two columns, but they don't really fit evenly. So I'd like things to be fit a little more evenly across this whole thing. Maybe the buttons should be bigger, that sort of stuff. So we have to start somewhere. So why don't we try? I'm going to try changing some of the font. So okay, we're going to look up font CSS. And as we go in there, I don't usually like W3 schools. I tend to like the Mozilla sites. I find it's a little better. They have some different types of fonts. So font family, that's a common one we use to change the font itself. They have some examples here. So they have this Gill Sans. I don't know that I've ever seen that actually used in a site. So here I'm going to do it to the whole body tag, which is here as the entire site. So this will change all the site to be using this Gill Sans. That looks a little nicer. I think I want this to actually be left aligned. So we're going to go to that main text and change it to be left aligned and save that. There we go. Okay, looks okay. It's not like this is absolutely incredible, but it's not bad. I kind of want the calculator itself to have a little bit of a background. So I'm going to, let's see, right here is where we actually have the calculator. So I'm going to call this, calculator container. Make sure I spell that right. And then I'm going to add another, I'm going to put that down here, and at the end we'll probably organize this nicely, but background, color, and then I know this, I know a couple basic hex code for things like gray colors, and I know EEE is basically a very light gray that you can see here. I also want this to have some padding. I think that would make it look nicer on the inside. So it sticks out a little differently on the right and left side, but maybe we'll deal with that a little later. I just want to do broad strokes to get started. And okay, so now let's start in. So when I type in here, this font, it's, who cares? It's just a number or whatever. I'm not going to worry about it. But I wouldn't mind a little bit of spacing inside. In some of these other ones, like the Google calculator, you have it's a little bit more spacing, and there's some even border around this. So we're going to have our text input, which is here. And we're going to give it a border radius, and we're going to make that, let's try 10 pixels. And that's a little too much. I don't quite like how that looks. So now we're making that 5 pixels. That's a little bit nicer. It's a little bit cleaner, or I just kind of like it a bit more. And then we're going to add a little bit of padding. Maybe we're going to add just like a 3 pixel padding in here. And so when I type, there's a little bit of space around it. Maybe we'll even increase that padding. Let's try it at 5 pixels. So yeah, that's a little nicer. That's a little bit bigger. Looks a little simpler. I kind of like that. And because I think that usually calculators don't work from the left alignment, we're going to change it to be right aligned so that now the numbers are typed in on that other side. Now we have the width at 100%, but it's not quite fitting quite how I'd hoped. So I'm just going to do a cheap kind of thing and not really try to figure out why it's not exactly fitting perfectly, and just make it 95% instead. And that kind of made it, okay, so now we have kind of a nice thing going on. Okay, again, I'm just walking through quickly. You're not going to necessarily be this quick. You might have to play around. But I, again, just want you to kind of get the feel for how the flow of this stuff might work. There's some playing around and messing around. Now, I want there to be a little bit more space between these two, like the buttons and the area. So I could do that in a couple places. I could change this main grid and maybe add it to have a margin top. So we went over margin, and margin can be a value that applies all at once, but you can also break that down into margin top, margin left, margin bottom, margin right. So we're going to make it a margin top, and that adds a little bit of space. Okay, we're already looking like a little bit neater. Now let's tackle the buttons. Actually, before that, let's organize this a little. So we're going to have, we can add little things called comments inside special tags, which will be grayed out, and that can help us organize our CSS code a little. We're going to run into this more in JavaScript. We're going to go over commenting more in detail, but just to help us organize, I'm going to have like general styles, and the body, for instance, is very general. The button is kind of very general. It applies to all of them. And then I'll have something like, you know, class styles, or I might even have like input styles. And then under that, I would just put the text input, and then I could put under that, you know, calculator button styles. And maybe, you know, when I write that, I go, actually, maybe then I should move the button down there, and we can move the heading up to the general styles. And then there's all these button styles, and this text align is kind of general. Okay, and the main grid, that's definitely falls into the calculator, but maybe not the buttons. So calculator container, or calculator layout. Again, I'm just making this stuff up to kind of, you know, organize this a little so it's a little easier to look at. There's a parent container, which is kind of a general style. Okay, so I've just reorganized. Nothing changed, but it just made it a little easier for us to look at when we're adding new styles. Okay, so now let's actually try changing the buttons. So first of all, let's go look at hex codes a little and try to figure out, I mean, the Google Calculator uses these nice light gray, which are probably a really good idea. So why don't we just try doing that? Instead of that, we're going to have the default color be something like, we already have a light gray background. Maybe we make it a little bit darker than that. So we're going to make it CCC. Again, I've just memorized these, but you could go look them up. It's a little darker. We probably want the color to be black then so that they stand out. Okay, and we have the padding and the margin. Let's give it a border radius as well on the buttons, like 3 pixels. Kind of rounds them a little. Oh, that looks a little, even that little bit of rounding really made things look a lot nicer, just like that. We could also change the border, but I don't actually mind. I think this looks kind of nice. That little bit of border radius really changed things. Okay, let's make maybe the font size a bit larger, because I want these buttons to take up more space. So if I make them 14 pixels, let's make the 20 pixels the font size. Okay, it's a lot bigger. That's a lot more readable, a lot better. Now, I noticed that some of them have different widths, so maybe we can make them all have a uniform width so that we're not dealing with like buttons that are different in size. So we're going to go width something. Let's try 50 pixels and see what happens. Okay, that's kind of a nice width. And even this is kind of lined up not bad. Maybe we could just do it a little bit less. 40 pixels. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And then we have room maybe to put the plus and the C up here beside these operations. Okay, that's a nice thing. Let's change, we kind of decided, okay, I can put these up here beside the operations buttons. So the operations buttons here, do we have that as an actual style? No. Well, what we're going to do is make this like another grid. We already have the grid holding these two divs, this one and this one, but now we can make another grid just to hold the 2 columns that we want to show here. So now I'm going to have operations buttons, and I'm going to make this display grid. All right, so then we're just doing the same thing with our operations buttons, and we're going to make it grid column 1FR, 1FR. And there, it broke up inside this, if we inspect, we can see it real quick. So if we go inside, we can see this operations button split up the divs into one column and then the other column. Pretty cool. And then but the main grid still splits it into one column and the other column. So this is already looking pretty good. I don't mind how this looks. I think I can probably almost leave it here. Maybe I'll just color these buttons a little bit differently. So the equals button, maybe we'll make that green instead. So we'll go to color codes and we'll try to find a nice green color, maybe something like that. So we make the equals button green. That's pretty cool. And the C button, maybe we make that white just to really stand out. And that's kind of cool. And maybe we make the operations buttons just a little bit of a different background, just so they stand out a bit differently. So we then can do operations buttons button, which actually selects all the buttons that are inside the operations button div or class. So we have this div, and then inside it we have buttons. So our button declaration, where was it? Here, applies to every button on the page, but this one applies only to buttons that come inside this one. So you can do this kind of chaining of things with CSS. We're going to see that a little later on, but just to get a handle on this, you can put more specific rules when it comes to CSS. There's so much to learn, so much to do. You'll run into a lot of it when you are out there using CSS in the wild. But here we're going to change, let's say we're going to go again, background, and instead of CCC, we're going to make it maybe a little bit lighter, and maybe make it DDD, and we'll see if it even is noticeable. Oh yeah, it is noticeable, but it overwrote our equals button. What's that about? Well, we also have this thing that CSS has to choose which rule to apply, and here the ID button still has to change, but this one doesn't. And so one of the things in CSS is different types of targeting has different priority. And I'm not going to, again, go over this because it's just going to get confusing. But if we just change this to an ID instead of a class, and then we come down here and change the equals button to be an ID instead of a class, then suddenly it works because IDs have more weight than classes. So that's all a bit crazy, but I think overall it's okay looking. We could probably spice it up with a little bit more color, but I think this is a nice place to leave it. You've seen a bit of the way I mess around, the way that you can put CSS together in different ways. And now we're going to start moving into a little bit of interactivity. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you can play around a bit, start decoding how CSS works on your own, and we'll see you in the next video.